I I had a student once who asked the question about when we say gladdening the mind. She thought that it would be the same as affirmation,
Mm-hmm.
and that after some reflection, it appears that affirmations are basically people telling themselves things that they hope will be true,
Mm-hmm.
like I'm wonderful and I'm marvelous and that kind of thing. And it generally also has a quality of selfishness in it, that the
Mm-hmm.
self-help books are trying to help yourself. Okay? So affirmations have then these two qualities that are problematic for being beneficial. One is the person, when he's giving the self the affirmations, he really doesn't quite believe it anyway.
Mm-hmm.
And so in a way, he's just lying to himself as well as just hoping. A better way of understanding this quality of gladdening the mind is that we're telling ourselves the truth about what's happening right now.
Mm-hmm.
And that gladdening the mind generally has the quality of, aha, I see you, in the sense of, I see you, Mara. This is exactly what the Buddha would say to himself when he was in that time between the time that he crawled out of the creek and renounced uh, the the self-flagellation and the austerities, and he had already previously abandoned the jhanas.
Mm-hmm.
And so then he came to the understanding, oh no, it's this first jhana that has to be fully developed rather than
Mm-hmm.
just running first jhana to second to third up, trying to get, the higher the number, the better you are, especially if you're on Wall Street. The
Mm-hmm.
bigger the account, the better, right? So that's why people do jhanas the way that they do. But when he figured out that it was the first jhana, he says, okay, that means that it has to be completely and fully developed.
Mm-hmm.
And in that time was when he figured out paticca samuppada. He figured out how the mind works. And that's why this idea of gladdening the mind becomes so important. A lot of people don't put these things together, but the Buddha really did say that to himself. I see you, Mara.
Mm-hmm.
Now, when he was saying, I see you, Mara, what he's saying is that's a metaphorical way of saying, I see actually the metaphorical daughters of Mara, which is greed, ill will, and delusion. And the way we see it is within our own mind.
Mm-hmm.
So, another way of expressing it is that when we see the hindrances as they arise, then we say, aha, I see you. Why? Because that changes the frame of reference rather than being stuck in greed, ill will, delusion, stuck in the past, stuck in a restless mind, stuck in a dull state, but mostly it's stuck in daydreaming of just thinking about things that we want. When we recognize that that is the state, that's when we start to gladden the mind in the sense of, aha, I see you.
Mm-hmm.
I see that stuff. Okay. So this quality of this is really what's happening right now. So you can actually then add the quality, or the next few words would be, isn't it marvelous to be free from that stuff?
Mm-hmm.
Isn't it nice to be free from the hindrances? This is also part of the gladdening of the mind
Mm-hmm.
that then leads to the satisfaction. So
Mm-hmm.
you're actually talking to yourself and talking yourself into something that's already there, which
Mm-hmm.
means really what's going on is that you're deepening your understanding and reality of the situation by giving yourself basically a guided tour.
Mm-hmm.
Aha, I see you, Mara.
Mm-hmm.
Aha, it feels so nice to be free from that.
Yeah. Right.
And so, in that regard, this is one's right effort. Trying to get pity is not one's right effort. And that's one of the places where a lot of students make a mistake. Pity arises out of the seclusion of the hindrances. It almost, you could think of it as rises up in a form of pride. But there's some songs that we can sing that indicate this. It has almost the language built into the song would be like zippity doo dah, wow, or this kind of expression. This is what we mean by gladdening the mind. And when we get the mind gladdened up in this fashion by merely allowing ourselves the full experience of the present moment, that's when we begin to feel a change of attitude. The change of attitude is from I want pity, is it in my foot? kind of mentality into the pity that has the attitude of I can do this. I can clean out my mind. It's almost like a bit of pride. I can do this. This is the quality that the Buddha is looking for in the development of that first jhana. And that, in fact, you could say that, okay, we've got kind of three things to do. One is to do the work that needs to be done, but that's number three. And what that is, that work that needs to be done is figuring out what our path in life is. But before we do that, we have to actually get the mind fit for work so that we can figure that task out. What is it that needs to be done? But before we even get to the first jhana, we need to have that confidence starting to grow and build that I can clean out the mind. I'm successful at doing that. Knowing all along that actually helps build this feeling or attitude. This attitude is actually a feeling of success. Here's an example of it. The real estate lady has been working on this real estate deal for months. And finally, she's got the buyer's signature, and now she's getting the seller's signature. And while that seller is in front of her signing that piece of paper, she's almost lunging to grab that paper. I've got it. So as soon as he puts the pen down, she's grabbed that contract. That's her big win. She's been working months for that. So you can sense the exhilaration that this real estate agent would have. She doesn't even have to have the afterthoughts of now my family can eat or any of that. It's I've got it. Is the whole quality that gives that feeling of great success. That's where the pity arises from. In other words, she could barely contain herself with her joy. Unfortunately, her joy was misguided. She thought that her joy came from a real estate contract. But really, she manufactured that joy in her own mind. Okay? That's an important point. Because what we're doing here is far more important than an individual real estate contract. That what we're doing here is putting the mind in the highest place that a human mind can go. We're taking ourselves out of the ordinary world and putting ourselves in the world of the nobles. Now, many times we have the idea that the word noble has to do with dandies or dudes who were well-dressed and well-behaved and well-mannered. But in fact, how we're dressed is not so important anyway. That's not important. What's important is how is the mind dressed. That's what makes one noble, is his mind, not his aloof attitude or his fine clothing or whatever like that. But the noble attitude that we're talking about is actually referred to as a change of lineage. The change of lineage. Jesus would refer to it as you must be born again in this noble world, or in the world of the kingdom of God.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, that's a misnomer. The actual Greek is basilica theos. Think about a basilica. All right, a basilica is like the biggest of the cathedrals, the very big ones. Okay, the St. Paul's is called not a cathedral but a basilica. It's that big. All right. So when we think of it like that, a basilica, or a huge palace with a huge open place, and that's the kind of place that we should reside,
Mm-hmm.
as if, we're the king of the palace. Well, you are, in fact, the king of the palace. A way of saying it is everyone is an emperor of his own pile of dirt, right? But most people are buried under their pile of dirt. They don't recognize that they're the emperor. So that change of lineage is coming out from under our hindrances, out from under our pile of dirt, and gaining control over it. We're sitting now on top of our own world. We're sitting on top of that pile of dirt. Now, we have to also recognize that our past is basically a big pile of dirt.
Mm-hmm.
And so we don't want to mess with it too much. Because if we mess with it, it's more like quicksand. We just fall right back into it. In fact, the more we squirm, the deeper we get. So we're thinking now along the line of gladdening the mind so that it elevates our opinion of who we are. That you see, if someone has a self, the whole quality of a self is that it's unchanging. It's the core, it's the essence, it's the root. And alchemy is all built around that quality. Can, for instance, lead be changed into gold? But the answer is no, because lead has lead qualities that you cannot change into the qualities of gold. Now, both are heavy. Both of them will conduct electricity. Both of them, in fact, don't rust and rot away like iron does.
Mm-hmm.
But lead is not bright and shiny. So it's not the same thing. But if you think about it, gold only has the quality of the gold in the marketplace because humans are adding extra value that's not really there.
Mm-hmm.
Gold in and of itself is basically worth no more than any other metal,
Mm-hmm.
depending upon how easy it is to extract. An example of that is at one time, aluminum was considered priceless above all other metals, even to the point that certain kings would let other people have gold and silver eating utensils while he got an aluminum one. Why was that? Because they hadn't invented smelting yet. Not smelting. They hadn't invented the electromagnetic process of converting Al3O2 into aluminum and the oxide. Aluminum oxide was hard to convert back to aluminum once it's in the oxide form.
Mm-hmm.
So once they learned how to not just smelt, but to actually to purify and to burn off the oxygen by adding electricity, that's when, guess what? Aluminum has taken over now an ordinary value. For a long time, there was the idea that, oh, it's better to use aluminum and that we want to hoard the aluminum, so we're going to start making automobile engines out of them. So the price of aluminum was elevated for many, many years. But now aluminum is dirt cheap. In fact, it's easier and cheaper to take aluminum cans out of the dumpster than it is to go to the ground and pull it out.
Mm-hmm.
Now, here's what I'm getting at with that is that the gold and the aluminum and all of that have no essential value or essential core.
Mm-hmm.
The same thing is true about the human being. We teach our children all the time that you're special. It's very rarely that we tell our kids, oh, wow, you're just ordinary now, and expect a big smile. No, every kid wants to be special. They want to get this ego built up,
Mm-hmm.
a sense of self. But it's only a sense of self that's there. That part of the investigation that will be done once the mind is ready for work is to figure out how the mind does work.
Mm-hmm.
And by figuring out how the mind works, we come to see that there is no essential core or me or self buried in there anywhere.
Mm-hmm.
That it's not there. That the self I arises out of conditions. When the conditions are right, the self is there. When there is these conditions are missing, even if I'm using pronouns like I, me, or my, I'm still not using those pronouns with a sense of I am or I am a self. So
Mm-hmm.
when we say, aha, I see you, Myra, aha,
Mm-hmm.
I see you, hindrance, or aha,
Mm-hmm.
I see you, past thoughts, it's not an I see you, but it's just that's the expression of language. You could actually
Mm-hmm.
take the I out of it and say, aha, I see you,
Mm-hmm.
but that's the whole quality that we're looking for is that we recognize when the mind is not fit for work, and we throw those kind of thoughts out
Mm-hmm.
and now start having the kind of thoughts that are wholesome and valuable and worthwhile having. Well, I wouldn't call affirmations wholesome and valuable because now we're just hoping.
Mm-hmm.
But when we actually get the mind cleaned out from that first point of, aha, I see you, that's when we bring it to that point now of feeling I good about the fact that I just was successful.
Mm-hmm.
That was the success, and that I'm going to build on that success. So basically, we talk about it as Sati is the main skill to be developed, not piti. Piti is actually the result of good practice
Mm-hmm.
rather than a goal to be attained.
Mm-hmm.
Almost a byproduct. It just comes with the territory once you
Mm-hmm.
get to that territory. But if
Mm-hmm.
you're out searching in this territory for pity, it's not going to be there for you. You got to get to the end of this point of changing our attitude.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I want pity is a loser's attitude. Yeehaw! Wow, I feel good. That is the right attitude, and that attitude brings on the pity. And how
Mm-hmm.
we develop that attitude is with gladdening the mind. I see you. Okay. So this is how that sequence works. Once and it's all a matter of the Eightfold Noble Path.
Mm-hmm.
First off, changing our viewpoint just slightly so that we begin to practice correctly. And then we develop sati over and over and over again because everyone spends most of their day in hindrance, most of the time, whether you're sitting or standing or whatever posture, or whether you're actually meditating, pretending or hoping to meditate, or bored with it or whatever. Generally, the hindrances are there to be seen. And this is what sati really is all about, is that wake up. And that wake up is basically what's going on right now, but it's what's going on in the mind. So one of the ways of talking about it then is sati, which is so important to develop, is actually listed then at stage 9 of anapanasati as
Mm-hmm.
experiencing the mind. Is the mind hindered? Is it free from hindrance? Is it sharp? Is it focused?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So this is the way that we begin to practice correctly, is with that right view, and then coupled with sati, so that we wake up to see what the mind is doing, and that's when the thought comes, aha, I see you, Mara. or I see that jump. Except that now, what the content of the mind is no longer the past thought or the Mara. Right now, what's happening is, I see you. So we're gladdening the mind. We've changed our perspective. This
Mhm.
is in fact one's right effort. The effort to get the mind out of this ordinary, I want something, into the state of, this is nice. I'm satisfied with how things are right now.
Mhm.
Okay. When we continue to do that over and over again, that's what builds this view of success. So now success is coming in there with the satisfaction. They work hand in hand. The success then is going to be the piti, and the sukha is the satisfaction,
Mhm.
bringing ourselves to a state of satisfaction. Well, guess what? Satisfaction is not the same as dissatisfaction. So
Mhm.
sukha and dukkha in this regard are opposites. And so this is what we're doing when we're gladdening the mind. We're bringing the mind to a state of satisfaction.
Mhm.
We also take some deep breaths, knowing that, especially nowadays, we understand how let us say, the cranial areas work and how important it is to breathe. Now, during Corona days, I hope everybody learns to breathe better.
Mhm.
And how do we do that? We remember. Aha. So part of that I see you, Myra, is the taking of the deep breath, reoxygenating the body, because it doesn't take much oxygen, meat, fuel, effort, or anything like that to let the mind spin on, because that's the habit it's been in all of these years. It's up
Mhm.
to speed at that level. It's
Mhm.
almost like you get a wagon or a car rolling downhill on its own by itself. It's really hard to stop it. And that's how the mind rolls on. It rolls
Mhm.
on downhill. Well, if the mind is rolling on downhill, it's bound to run into something at the bottom there. And that's where we find ourselves, is stuck in the bottom of our mind. And so now we have to go back uphill. That's one's right effort, is to
Mhm.
go back up. And the way that we do that would be, every time we see that the mind is rolling on, is to stop it right then and say, I see you, Mr. Rolling Mind. I see you, Myra. I see you. That gives us a sense of well being just by itself. I see you.
Mhm.
That gives us a sense of well being or satisfaction. That in fact, that's what the scriptures actually say, if you can call them scriptures, that the piti and the sukha are born of the seclusion. In other
Mhm.
words, it's being free from the hindrances that do give rise then, or they are born from the freedom of the hindrances. So
Mhm.
when we get the mind cleaned out, we naturally start to think good about it, and then
Mhm.
we begin to really feel good about it
Mhm.
because we've changed our attitude. Okay, now it's only in. Got to be careful here. As uh, piti develops, and as the first jhana develops,
Mhm.
when we if and when we go into second jhana, is when the rapture and the piti express themselves at a level of feeling that becomes physical in the body,
Mhm.
so that the hair on the arms will stand up, or chills will come up the back. This is what the Hindus call the kundalini.
Mhm.
Okay, all of that stuff is there. When it gets really heavy, sometimes it even knocks people over.
Mhm.
It's just, like that. Um, a big rush of it. But let's not talk about that, because that's not what the goal is. These are just side benefits
Mhm.
of having a mind well um, developed. And so let's leave pity now for you at the level of great satisfaction, great joy, based upon the success that you can get your mind clean.
Mm-hmm.
And there comes a confidence. If we do that over and over and over and over again, oh, in this case, an example of it would be learning to ride a bike. When we first start learning to ride a bike, there's so much to do. We've got to keep the handlebars going in a certain direction. We've got to keep the balance going. We've got to pedal. There's just so
Mm-hmm.
much for us to do all at the same time. But once the student gets going on the bicycle, he's still really unsteady with it.
Mm-hmm.
But the more he rides, tiny little insights will come to him about how to steady himself, how to actually go around curves at high speed and other things like that. So he actually develops the skill of riding the bicycle.
Mm-hmm.
But it was actually a lot of little different skills. Now, generally, bicycle teachers, I don't even know if there's any bicycle teachers. And
I think
if
the
that's,
parents usually.
yeah, the parents teach the kids, but they don't know much about what they're doing. But to where this stuff that we're talking about here, that goes under the label of Sati or Sita Bhavana, that has been wrongly translated into the word meditation. And
Mm-hmm.
so we're kind of stuck with that. It's almost like that. Um, in Christianity, it has so fallen out of fashion that when Buddhism came along, the Christians just gave the word meditation to the Buddhists. It's yours, you can have it. To where what happens really with meditation is what Christians are doing anyway, trying to figure out their their bullshit story. That's what meditation is all about. So they will meditate on um, the Trinity, or
Mm-hmm.
meditate on the grace of God, or something like this. So this is what we mean, which is actually meditation or cogitation, which is basically nothing but corralling the hindrances into a small space, to where
Mm-hmm.
what we're doing is we're just throwing them out altogether. Because we're
Mm-hmm.
coming to this here now, we're not substituting one complex thought system for another, which is what meditation does.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Now, there is going to be room for that later, but right now the job is to get the mind fit for work. And the way that we get the mind fit for work is by getting our mind into this state that we recognize we can keep the hindrances out. How we do that is first getting them out.
Mm-hmm.
That's the first thing we got to do, is get the hindrances out of the mind. And we need to practice that over and over again, not paying too much attention to that they keep coming back, or excuse me,
Mm-hmm.
that they keep coming back, in the sense that this state of being free from hindrances doesn't last long. And so that's when people get a bad attitude. Oh, this is too much work. Oh, here they come again. To where the right attitude is, with Goenka's attitude, is never mind, start again.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, we're learning to ride a bicycle of the mind. Never mind that we're falling over and we're laying in the dirt. Get
Mm-hmm.
up, get back on that bicycle, and try it again, over and over and over again. This is the main skill that's to be developed, is
Mm-hmm.
getting back on that bicycle. You know, that's a famous point about not just bicycling, but especially horse riding. For a kid to learn to ride a horse, he's going to get thrown. He's going to
Mm-hmm.
get knocked off. That horse is going to take him under a tree and brush him off. All right. Horses are pretty smart dudes, and so they know how to get a kid off their back.
Mm-hmm.
But a good teacher or a dad will put that kid right back on that horse. I remember that was one of my students who was here in Thailand, and he was going to he'd never ridden a motorbike, but he was going to take the motorbike and see the island.
Mm-hmm.
And the first time he got on it, he didn't know what he was doing. I even explained it carefully to him, but he didn't use the brake, and he just gunned it. And with 10 feet later, he'd run into the truck. Never mind. Let's go through the basics again. Here's the brake. Be sure you use the brake. More important the brake than the throttle. So even if you've got the throttle wide open in panic, if you've got that brake, you can control the motorbike.
Mm.
But here his legs are all akimbo, and the mic is bright going. Right, okay, never mind. Get back on the thing. Later, after he came back, he says, "I'm so glad. I was going to get off that motorbike and quit, but you put me back on it, and I'm really pleased that I was
Mm.
actually able to learn to ride that bicycle." Okay, so that's what we're talking about here: is getting back on over and over and over again, because the mind is going to fall back into hindrances, and that's going to happen for years.
Mhm.
Going to happen for years, because it'll take years to figure out sometimes which thoughts are worth having and which thoughts are not worth
Mhm.
having.
Mhm.
And we'll think that some thoughts are just prize. Oh, wow, I did. And no, that's just another hindrance. Okay. So, um, in that regard, this is what we're practicing then, is this Eightfold Noble Path, especially these four important qualities that are to be developed. And that is right view, right attitude comes later, but right view runs and circles with right effort and right sati, the ability to look at the mind, wake up, see what you're doing. If I were going to translate sati into English and had free reign to do so,
Mhm.
rather than using the word mindfulness, because that's another word. I mean, I never heard of the word mindfulness when it's not talking about meditation. All right. Mindfulness is an English language word that nobody uses.
Mhm.
I guess
Yeah.
that's why but it's not mindfulness in that regard. Um, Rather, when they say for the kid to mind your P's and Q's, that means to remember to look so that you know the difference between a P and a Q.
Mhm.
All right. So basically, then mindfulness is sati, but it's not mindfully watching. It's mindfully remembering to watch. That's the quality, is to remember, or in fact, to take another look at what the mind is doing. And so, a
Mhm.
better word to be used then, rather than mindfulness, I like the word wakey, wakey, to wake up,
Mm.
to see what's happening in the mind in this present moment. What am I thinking about? And normally, what I'm thinking about is something other than what I was intending to think about in the regard of watching the breath.
Mhm.
So I was intending to watch the breath, and now I am remembering an argument that I had with Aunt Susie.
Mhm.
And so I wake up and I say, "No, Susie, you're out of here. I see you, Mr. Argument." And so we come back into this moment very pleased that I don't have to think about that argument that I had with Susie. I can come back and enjoy this moment. I can come back and feel really good about taking a deep breath and feeling very happy and pleased. So this is the direction that we're going in to develop the first jhana,
Mhm.
so that we become skilled in its entry, skilled in its management, and skilled at coming out of first jhana. Now, here's something very interesting in the suttas. That's only mentioned about the first jhana. Nowhere does it ever say that about the second, third, or fourth jhana. It only talks about really developing the skill of being able to maintain that
Mm.
first jhana state. That's what we're wanting to do. And yet, in the beginning, it just goes right away. And so we
Mhm.
have to keep bringing the mind back over and over again to develop sati and the right effort.
Mhm.
But also, we're going to allow that state of well being, that state of satisfaction, that state of joy, happiness that's built upon the success and the satisfaction of doing this over and over again. That state becomes um, deeper, more profound. You do it more often. And every time you do it, you really like it. This feels
Mhm.
really nice. And so we're developing that state. As we do this, now we're beginning to also develop other jhana factors, and the other jhana factors right here would be applied and sustained thought. What I mean by applied is that, okay, I'm going to only apply the mind to those things that are going to be able to keep me in this state.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not going to apply the mind to the things that are going to be tearing me out of it. This is an important point. Think about that. We're going to now apply the mind to only good, wholesome, and valuable thoughts. And as soon as the mind wants to wander into unwholesome thoughts, we're going to catch it.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to say, there you go again, Mr. Myron, but you're not coming in this time. I see you. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And so this is how we begin to keep the Mara at bay.
Mm-hmm.
Is when it starts to come back, we're going to say, oh no, now that I've applied my mind to wholesome things, I'm going to keep it there in wholesome things.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so now this is not just the development of the right attitude. This is also the development of the first jhana that really solid makes that solid attitude of I'm a winner. I can do this.
Mm-hmm.
This is nice state, and I can put myself into this state anytime I want to.
Mm-hmm.
I can become free from suffering by merely or not. Suffering's a very heavy word. I got to remember that when I use it to tell the students that most people in the world, if you go around saying, I've got Buddhism, are you suffering? Are you suffering? Everybody will say, no, I'm not suffering. But if I go around saying, I've got the Buddha, is anybody dissatisfied with their life? Everybody will say yes.
Yeah.
Okay, so dukkha is actually dissatisfaction.
Mm-hmm.
And the way to manage that is by getting the mind into a state of satisfaction. And that's basically all there is to it, is moving the mind with an attitude out of the first noble truth into the third.
Mm-hmm.
So we begin to experience now and play with and identify and see directly this is the third noble truth. This is satisfaction. This is freedom from dukkha.
Mm-hmm.
The Bhikkhu Buddhadasa calls this a little Nibbana. And he's written a book. You might want to find it on the internet. It's called Nibbana for Everyone.
Mm.
Because most people, when they hear that, especially Westerners, they say Nibbana for everyone. No, Nibbana is something that only a few, only a very few people get, and they generally are jerks. But no, Nibbana is for everyone, and in fact, you could think of it this way: is that everyone has to cool off during the day or in the evening sometime. If we stayed in a state of hot agitation all the time, we'd probably die of a heart attack. Some people do. But almost everyone has a little Nibbana moment from time to time. They just sit down in the chair and go, oh, what a bad day. But the time when they said, oh, what a bad day was a point of emptiness, a point of Nibbana, a point where nothing was happening, nothing was conditioned. Didn't last very long, but at least it cleaned the mind out a little bit. We want to be able to do that often.
Mm.
To just say, and take that out breath, exhaust, and just throw everything out. And then wow, feels so good to be empty, to be into that, to be in that state of third noble truth. And so in that regard, we're also developing this state of first jhana, takes one into this coolness or into this state of Nibbana, where the mind is really, really well trained now, because now we've got an additional thing, and that is the sustained thought. You're frozen. I don't know if you're with me or not. This is David. Okay, you're calling back on your own call.
Hello.
Oh, oh, yes. Okay. So you're back. You froze up.
Yeah, I'm not sure what happened. The window just closed down for no reason.
Okay. Well, I'm glad that you're back up. In fact, we're still on the same call. It didn't even cancel the
Oh,
call.
oh,
It just
okay.
added you to the call you were already on.
All right, good.
So, um, getting back to what we were talking about is getting this state of satisfaction now. We begin to take a new attitude about it, and that is this is worth keeping.
Mm,
In the development, we were just this is worth getting. Get happy,
mm-hmm,
get happy. Don't worry, be happy over and over again. But now we're going to look at it in kind of a new way, and that is just to sustain
mm-hmm,
this state. And this is where we would talk about it in the sense of the mind being on guard.
mm-hmm,
So that you're going to guard the mind, you're going to pay attention to every thought that you have and only allow thoughts in that are wholesome, valuable, useful. And
mm-hmm,
you're not going to let any thoughts in that, in fact, could pull you out of this state of satisfaction.
mm-hmm,
And the mind will do that. It will. It will go back into its old normal habits. And if you can catch that, then
mm-hmm,
you can bring it back to this state very quickly and very easy. So again, we can say, I see you, Myra. But now the Myra is at a distance rather than the owner of the mind.
mm-hmm,
And we begin not only to do that with thoughts, we also begin to see that as feelings. In fact, this is the state when the student is able to maintain the thoughts in wholesome states, is when they begin to really get in touch with their anxieties and their fears and all of the stuff that's associated with the body. And the reason for it is because we've got the mind under control enough so that we're beginning to break the link between the hindrances and the feelings that they have. We kept pushing the hindrances out, and now we're left with all of this turmoil of those feelings that were there. Okay, and you could say that well, rapture and piti, or sukha and piti, are now going to be the new feelings that we have rather than the old feelings of anxiety and guilt and worry and all of that
mm-hmm,
kind.
mm-hmm,
So, in this regard, we're going to actually first off change the way that we think, and also with right attitude change the way that we feel, at least
mm-hmm,
in this moment, and begin to sustain that. Well, by
mm-hmm,
sustaining that, also, that's when we really start to get in touch with what thoughts are worth having and what feelings are worth having. That anxiety is not a feeling that I want to have. I would rather be satisfied and contented than
mm-hmm,
dissatisfied wanting something.
mm-hmm,
Okay. So this is how we then start practice that sustained thought. And so we can think of it like this. This is kind of a funny one, but it's like a very popular bar or a disco to where you have a big dude at the door and he's checking names and he's looking at the way that people are dressed and whatnot like that because he's only going to let the best people in, the ones who's got money.
mm,
And he's not going to let the folks in who don't have much money. Okay, so that's basically his criteria: is who's he going to let into the bar and who's not going to get into the bar. Well, that's after things are really well established.
mm,
That's the bouncer at the door now is guarding the door of the mind. But basically, what's happening is that sometimes guys have gotten in who should not be in there, and now they're creating a mess, starting a fight, yelling at the top of their lungs, throwing their beer mugs around, and that kind of stuff. And you got to go grab those guys and throw them out of the bar.
mm-hmm,
Okay. So that analogy is the twofold task that you have is one is you've got a clean house. That's throwing those hindrances out. And now we stand at the door and make sure that only good, wholesome customers come into the mind. And if one of them turns out to be not such a good customer and winds up being a jerk, then we grab him and we throw him out too.
Mm-hmm.
So this is the analogy of it may be, let us say, an ordinary analogy or metaphor, but that's basically the job of a bouncer.
Mm-hmm.
And so you become a guard, you become a bouncer for your own mind's contents.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And this is the way that we begin to practice that sustaining of the good thought. So the next things that we have to figure out is, well, what are unwholesome thoughts and what are wholesome thoughts? What is it that we're going to be worth putting into the mind, and the things that are not worth having in the mind? This is what we're actually now saying is what we mean by applied and sustained thought, is that now we're really going to start looking at the Dhamma in the way of it's wholesome.
Mm.
And so our thoughts are going to have to do with this present moment, seeing the Four Noble Truths as they play out. When, for instance, that suffering or that dukkha or that Mara come, we can catch that and we can see it in the distance without letting it in. That's the way that we're going to do, but we have to be able to identify Mara. What is it? And so the way that we're going to do that is eventually look at the way that the mind works that ends up in dukkha. This is the way that the mind works. Is a phrase that I use for the teaching paticca samuppada. The Thais call it paticca samuppada. But what it actually translates to is dependent origination. In other words, the suffering in the mind or the dukkha in the mind is dependent. It arises dependently. That things don't arise independently.
Sorry to interrupt, but I do need to get off pretty soon.
Okay.
So I don't know if you want to wrap it up in a minute or
All right. Well,
two.
you and I are on the same thought with that.
Okay. Okay. Great.
In the sense that now what part of what you and I have to do together is to go into a fairly deep analysis of what, excuse me, what thoughts are worthy of having and what thoughts are not worthy of having, so that you can sustain that state.
Mm-hmm.
But until we do that, from now until then, your job is to practice getting into that state over and over and over again, knowing naturally you don't have the tools to sustain it yet,
Mm-hmm.
and that we'll develop that later. So right now, the intention should be is to get into that state, getting
Okay.
into it. See that Mara, throw it out, take a deep breath, uh, congratulate yourself, allow yourself to have a really nice little moment, take a deep breath. Wow, it's good to be free from thoughts about work or thoughts about the argument I had with Susie or whatever, and come to a state of rest. And do that over and over and over and over again. That means you're developing right view, right sati, right effort, and right attitude. Over and over and over again, we need to develop those things.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? So that's where I'll leave you now is to practice getting yourself into a state of feeling really nice,
All
knowing
right.
it's not going to last.
Okay.
Not yet. We're going to make it last later. But right
All
now,
right.
we want to just keep getting it over and over and over again.
Okay.
All
All
right?
right. Thank you. Thank you for your time.
Okay, David. We'll see you. When you going to call back again?
We'll see. My schedule's I'm working from home now.
Did I know
But
that?
what's that?
Did I know that?
Yeah. So, but we'll see. I mean, maybe in a few days I can give you a call.
Okay. All right. We'll see you in a few.
All right. All right. Take care. Bye-bye.
Okay. Bye bye.